Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Numbers, chapter 11, verse 24, through chapter 13, verse 33. So Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord. He then gathered 70 men of the elders of the people and had them stand around the tabernacle. And the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to them. And he took some of the Spirit that was on Moses and put it on the 70 elders. When the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied, but did not do so again. But 2 men remained in the camp. One's name was Eldad, and the other's name was Medad. And the Spirit rested on them. Now they were among those in the registration, but had not gone to the tabernacle. So they prophesied in the camp. And a young man ran and told Moses, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of Moses, one of his choice young men, said, My lord Moses, stop them. Moses said to him, Are you jealous for me? I wish that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord would put his Spirit on them. Then Moses returned to the camp along with the elders of Israel. Now a wind went out from the Lord, and brought quail from the sea, and let them fall near the camp, about a day's journey on this side, and about a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, and about 3 feet high on the surface of the ground. And the people stayed up all that day, all that night, and all the next day, and gathered the quail. The one who gathered the least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth, before they chewed it, the anger of the Lord burned against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. So the name of that place was called Kibroth-Hattaavah, because there they buried the people that craved different food. The people traveled from Kibroth-Hattaavah to Hazeroth, and they stayed at Hazeroth. Then Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. They said, Has the Lord only spoken through Moses? Has he not also spoken through us? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more so than any man on the face of the earth. The Lord spoke immediately to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. The 3 of you come to the tent of meeting. So the 3 of them went. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent. He then called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. The Lord said, Hear now my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known to him in a vision. I will speak with him in a dream. My servant Moses is not like this. He is faithful in all my house. With him I will speak face to face, openly, and not in riddles, and he will see the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? The anger of the Lord burned against them, and he departed. When the cloud departed from above the tent, Miriam became leprous as snow. Then Aaron looked at Miriam, and she was leprous. So Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, please do not hold this sin against us, in which we have acted foolishly and have sinned. Do not let her be like a baby born dead, whose flesh is half consumed when it comes out of its mother's womb. Then Moses cried to the Lord, Heal her now, O God. The Lord said to Moses, If her father had only spit in her face, would she not have been disgraced for 7 days? She shut her out from the camp 7 days, and afterward she can be brought back in again. So Miriam was shut outside of the camp for 7 days, and the people did not journey on until Miriam was brought back in. After that the people moved from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. The Lord spoke to Moses, Send out men to investigate the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. You are to send 1 man from each ancestral tribe, each one a leader among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran at the command of the Lord. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. Now these were their names. From the tribe of Reuben, Shammua son of Zachar. From the tribe of Simeon, Shaphat son of Hori. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb son of Jephunneh. From the tribe of Issachar, Igal son of Joseph. From the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea son of Nun. From the tribe of Benjamin, Palti son of Raphu. From the tribe of Zebulun, Gadiel son of Sodi. From the tribe of Joseph, namely the tribe of Manasseh, Gadi son of Susi. From the tribe of Dan, Amiel son of Gamaliel. From the tribe of Asher, Sether, son of Michael. From the tribe of Naphtali, Nabi, son of Vopshi. From the tribe of Gad, Geuel, son of Maki. These are the names of the men whom Moses sent to investigate the land, and Moses gave Hoshea, son of Nun, the name Joshua. When Moses sent them to investigate the land of Canaan, he told them, "Go up through the Negev and then go up into the hill country, and see what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, few or many, and whether the land they live in is good or bad, and whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or fortified cities, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether or not there are forests in it. And be brave and bring back some of the fruit of the land." Now it was the time of the year for the first ripe grapes. So they went up and investigated the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob at the entrance of Hamath. When they went up through the Negev, they came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, descendants of Anak, were living. Now Hebron had been built 7 years before Zon in Egypt. When they came to the valley of Eshcol, they cut down from there a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a staff between two men, as well as some of the pomegranates and the figs. That place was called the Eshcol Valley, because of the cluster of grapes that the Israelites cut from there. They returned from investigating the land after 40 days. They came back to Moses and Aaron and to the whole community of the Israelites in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They reported to the whole community and showed the fruit of the land. They told Moses, "We went to the land where you sent us. It is indeed flowing with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. But the inhabitants are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan." Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses, saying, "Let us go up and occupy it, for we are well able to conquer it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go up against these people, because they are stronger than we are." Then they presented the Israelites with a discouraging report of the land they had investigated, saying, "The land that we passed through to investigate is the land that devours its inhabitants. All the people we saw there are of great stature. We even saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak came from the Nephilim. And we seemed like grasshoppers, both to ourselves and to them." A lot there. You have previously the people complaining, and the Spirit of the Lord being dispersed on 70 elders among the people of Israel. And quail being brought for the people to eat, and the people having a plague subsequently brought on them. The murmuring of Miriam and Aaron against Moses, and Miriam subsequently turning leprous and being expelled from the camp for 7 days. And then spies being sent out into the promised land to examine it and see if the land was good or not and what it was like. And yeah, a bad report being brought back from the majority of them, except for Caleb and Hoshea, who was later named Joshua, who said essentially that the land could be conquered. So from Guzik here. He gathered the 70 men of the elders of the people and placed them around the tabernacle. Before God provided the meat for Israel, which they asked for but didn't really need, he first provided them more leadership and oversight, which they didn't ask for but really did need. And took of the Spirit that was upon him and placed the same upon the 70 elders. For this expanded leadership to do the job, they needed to have an outpouring of the Holy Spirit, and they needed to have the same Spirit that was on Moses. They needed to have his vision, his heart, and his attitude. Yeah, that same oil that powered Moses and burned in his life, they needed in their lives as well. when the Spirit rested upon them, that they prophesied. It is difficult to picture exactly what this was like. Perhaps they each spoke spontaneously of a word from God, or divinely inspired praises to God. Whatever exactly happened, it was a clear sign that the Spirit of the Lord had come upon them. As with Saul, the prophecy described here was probably an unintelligible, ecstatic utterance, what the New Testament terms speaking in tongues, not the inspired, intelligible speech of the great Old Testament prophets and the unnamed prophets of the early church, from Wenham. I guess in both cases, it isn't really said what they are prophesying. Although they never did so again. Apparently, the prophetic gift was given to these elders in a unique one-time experience. They prophesied this once, but did not become prophets. It was meant to be visible evidence of the Holy Spirit's equipping them for the office of elder, not the role of prophet. I wonder what the word used here is. Naba? To prophesy under the influence of a divine spirit? A primitive root to prophesy, that is, to speak or sing by inspiration. To cause to bubble up, hence to pour forth words abundantly, as is done by those who speak with ardor or divine emotion of mind. Interesting. Oh, let's see what else we got. Yet they prophesied in the camp. The operation of the Holy Spirit was not limited to only one place. Even these two men, Eldad and Medad, who were not at the tabernacle with the rest of the 70 elders, were also filled with the Holy Spirit, evidenced by the prophetic gift. Joshua was first introduced as leading the battle against the Amalekites in Exodus 33, 7-11. When he learned of what Eldad and Medad did, Joshua hoped to support Moses. His first concern was for Moses' ministry and feared that this unusual display of the Spirit might in some way undermine it. Perhaps Eldad and Medad would become rivals to Moses. Oh, that all the Lord's people were prophets and that the Lord would put his Spirit upon them. Moses probably appreciated that Joshua was zealous for his sake, but Moses did not fear for these men as rivals. Instead, Moses longed that all God's people would receive this gift of his Spirit. Yeah, reminds me of, I think it's Jeremiah, where there's a prophecy concerning that brother won't instruct and say, know the word of the Lord, for they will all know it, type thing. Now a wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quail. Miraculously, God directed a huge number of quail to the camp of Israel, where they were killed and could be eaten. Quail migrate over the Sinai wilderness every year. It has been recorded that Arabs living near this region could catch between 1 and 2 million quail during their autumn migration using nets. The quail came all around the camp, that is, on the perimeter. When the Holy Spirit was poured out, it drew men into the center of the camp, right into the middle of the people of God. To get the quail, they had to go outside of the camp, away from the people of God. From Alan here. The scene must have been similar to a riot, people screaming, birds flapping their wings everywhere, the pell-mell movement of a meat-hungry people in a sea of birds. While the meat was still between their teeth before it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was aroused against the people. The people, with great effort and excitement, gathered the quail and prepared it for eating. But when they ate. While the meat was still between their teeth, the Lord sent a plague among them, and many died. From Psalm 78, 27 through 31, he also rained meat on them like the dust, feathered fowl like the sand of the seas, and he let them fall in the midst of their camp, all around their dwellings. So they ate and were well filled, for he gave them their own desire. They were not deprived of their craving, but while their food was still in their mouths, the wrath of God came against them, and slew the stoutest of them, and struck down the choice men of Israel. Psalm 106, 13 through 15 also says, They soon forgot his works. They did not wait for his counsel, but lusted exceedingly in the wilderness, and tested God in the desert. And he gave them their request, but sent leanness into their soul. When we allow ungodly cravings to rule our lives, God may send what we crave, and leanness into our soul as well. Better to have a well-fed soul than to be deprived of ungodly cravings. There are times when God grants an unwarranted request in order that we may learn, through experience, the folly of their desires. This was a strict judgment, but it was to help Israel, because it taught them to not be ruled by their desires. If the lesson was learned, it was a huge help to the nation. To inherit the land of Canaan, God's promised land for Israel, they had to be ruled by more than their physical or emotional appetites. So he called the name of that place Kibroth Hattaavah. They named the place Kibroth Hattaavah, which means graves of craving. Spiritually speaking, many people are killed by their unrestrained desires. Jesus proclaimed that he was God's true or ultimate bread from heaven. Like the manna in the wilderness, this was God's provision, and there was nothing else to eat. Israel was sustained only by manna in the wilderness, and the disciple is sustained only by Jesus and nothing else. Yeah. And as Christians, we're commanded to put the old man to death. That is these, and part of that is these ungodly desires and cravings, because they ultimately lead to death. And I think it's kind of a stark picture that we either put that old man to death or are put to death ourselves as we embrace a lifestyle that will ultimately kill us. So, Miriam and Aaron speaking out against Moses. Miriam and Aaron were the sister and brother of Moses. Their disapproval of Moses and his Ethiopian wife was an example of a principle later stated by Jesus, that it is not unusual for a prophet to be without honor among his own people. According to Allen, Miriam took the lead in this criticism. The feminine singular verb that initiates this chapter, and she spoke, and the placement of her name before that of Aaron indicated that Miriam is the principal in the attack against Moses. Because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. This was the reason for their criticism. Some regard this as a problem passage, because Exodus 2:16 through 22 says that the wife of Moses, named Zipporah, was the daughter of a man from Midian. Some think that Zipporah died, and this was the second wife Moses took after her death. Remember that Moses had a remarkably long life and was more than 81 at this time. It is certainly possible he survived several wives. Others think Moses took a second wife in addition to Zipporah. This is possible, but doesn't seem likely. Still others suggest that Jethro, Zipporah's father, was actually from Ethiopia and had moved to Midian, making Zipporah an Ethiopian by birth, but living in Midian. It may also be possible that Ethiopian here was a derogatory term used to criticize Zipporah because of her dark complexion. For he had married an Ethiopian woman. Interestingly, they criticized Moses and his wife over something she had no control over, her appearance, either because she was an Ethiopian, a black or dark African, or had a dark complexion as an Ethiopian. As the following verses will show, the complaint over Moses' wife was not the real issue. Many people are criticized over things that are not the real issue, or things they have no control over. Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? This question was meant to tear Moses down, asked with the assumption that Moses was spiritually proud. The idea was that Moses arrogantly presented himself as the only spokesman of God to Israel. In one sense, their answer to their question was no. God spoke to the people through Aaron in Exodus 4:30. God again spoke to Aaron in Exodus 12:1. Miriam spoke words inspired by God in Exodus 15:21. On one other occasion, the elders of Israel spoke in some supernatural ways in Numbers 11:24 through 25. In another sense, the answer to their question was yes. God had spoken only through Moses. God appointed Moses as the one leader of Israel, and God uses Moses as his spokesman to Israel. Yeah. Now the man Moses was very humble. Moses had no problem with pride. Quite the contrary, his accusers were the one with a pride problem. Just because a man is accused of pride or arrogance doesn't mean he is guilty of it. More than all men who were on the face of the earth. Yet, if Moses was so humble, and if Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, we wonder how a humble man could possibly call himself the humblest man on the face of the earth. In all likelihood, someone added this comment after the death of Moses, perhaps Joshua, who would have known Moses well. It is important to see Moses didn't start out as the humblest man on earth. He grew up proud and confident in his abilities. It was only time, desert time, lowly time, and that made him a humble and greatly usable man. Moses was very humble. Other commentators suggest that humble is better understood as low or miserable, and this describes a low point in Moses' life. I think the word is not rightly understood from Clark here. Anav, which we translate meek, comes from ana, to act upon, to humble, depressed, afflict, and is translated so in many places in the Old Testament, and in this sense it should be understood here. Now this man Moses was depressed or afflicted more than any man of that land. Possibly. I mean, in context, I think it makes less sense because the highlight is on the pride issue of, here Moses is elevating himself and pushing down everyone else. So contextually, I seem to favor the humble portion. But God says, when I speak with Moses, I speak with him face to face. The basis of the complaint of Miriam and Aaron was essentially, what's so special about Moses? Here, God explained exactly what was so special about him. Most prophets receive revelation through a dream or in a vision. God spoke with Moses face to face. What did it mean that God spoke with Moses face to face? Didn't the Lord say in Exodus 33:20, "You cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live"? How then could God speak with Moses face to face? Face to face is a figure of speech telling of great and unhindered intimacy. Moses' face was not literally beholding the literal face of God, but he did enjoy direct, intimate conversation with the Lord. This is also demonstrated by the phrase, "and he sees the form of the Lord." This is what Moses had actually seen of God with his physical eyes, only the form of the Lord, nothing specific, because he could not see the Lord and live. My servant Moses, he is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face, even plainly, and not in dark sayings. Moses enjoyed remarkable communion with God, and it is worth considering why. Because God needed a man this intimate with him to be a vessel of revelation and a proper leader for the nation, through this remarkable time of the Exodus, the communion was a gift of the sovereign God to Moses. Because Moses was a humble man, and because Moses, according to God, is faithful in all my house. His walk of righteousness and purity, demonstrated over 40 years in obscure service of God in the smallest things, revealed the faithful heart God saw in Moses. And I think that's a worthy goal for us to pursue as Christians as well, is to be for that phrase, to be faithful in all God's house, to be applicable to us individually. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? As much as Miriam and Aaron did not want to recognize it, Moses did have a unique calling and equipping before the Lord. It was not that Moses was beyond criticism. Moses was not to be simply obeyed and praised and never confronted or asked the tough questions. In fact, another relative of Moses, his father-in-law Jethro, did confront Moses and ask him the tough questions, and he was greatly used of God in doing so. Miriam and Aaron should have been afraid to speak against Moses because their criticism was simply not true. Moses was not a proud man, but the humblest man on earth. Yeah. And Miriam suddenly became leprous. Leprosy was a disease of bodily decay and corruption. It was considered to be a walking death, and Miriam had a seriously advanced case of leprosy instantly. At this moment, God caused her body to reflect her heart. And then Aaron turned toward Miriam, and there she was, a leper. It seems that Miriam did not immediately know this. The sense seems to be that Aaron noticed it first as he turned and looked. "O my Lord, please do not lay this sin on us." Now Aaron called Moses, his master, attributed to Moses the power to strike Miriam with leprosy, and confessed his previous criticism as foolish and sinful. Sadly, we can't seem to separate Aaron's immediate and dramatic change of heart from the threat that he might be the next victim of God's judgment. His confession seems full of self-interest. So Moses cried out to the Lord, "Please heal her, O God, I pray." This was the first word spoken by Moses in this chapter. He had not spoken the entire time he was accused, leaving it up to God to answer his critics. And his first word is our intercession for those who were condemning him, which I think is a good example of Jesus. When a leader perceives accusations are petty, false, or self-motivated, the right thing to do is to ignore them, leave them up to God, and keep busy with what the Lord has called the leader to do. Even as Jesus was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Let her be shut out of the camp 7 days, and afterwards she may be received again. God did in fact heal Miriam. If she was still a leper, she would not have been allowed to remain in the camp of Israel. Yet God allowed her to live with the outward display of her inward heart for 7 days, and allowed the whole nation to know it. So Miriam was shut out of the camp 7 days. This was appropriate because Miriam had done something even more shameful than her own father spitting in her face. She tried to bring down a leader of God's people with petty, false, and self-interested criticism. Yeah, it's not right to tear down the work of men who are being used by God. And then you have the spies sent out here. Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua, and he renamed him basically from Hoshea, which is salvation, to Yahoshua, which means Yahweh is salvation. Joshua became his name in the name of the Messiah, who is our salvation. See what the land is like. Moses' direction to the spies was a subtle manifestation of unbelief. Did he really doubt that the land was good? Did he doubt that the land was rich? Did he doubt that there were useful forests? Did it matter if the people were strong or many, or if they lived in strongholds? This was an entirely reasonable pursuit for Moses, and representative of the curiosity of the whole nation. After all, they had never seen this land, nor had any Israelites, for some 400 years. God already told them what the land was like. At Moses' calling at the burning bush, God told him the land of Canaan was a good land and large, a land flowing with milk and honey. And Moses told the people of the goodness of the land. Whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak. We wonder what the people of Israel thought they would do if a negative report came back. Would they resolve to return to Egypt? It truly does flow with milk and honey. What God had promised about the land was true. The word nevertheless means despite all of that. At that moment, Moses and every man of faith in Israel should have cried out and said, "Nevertheless, nothing." How can one say, "We went to the land, found it good, and God's promise true," and then say, "Despite all this"? Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. It is hard to imagine a report more unbelieving and unfaithful to God than this. A report that recognizes the faithfulness of God's promise, the truth of his word, and yet says, despite all that. But Caleb quieted the people, commanded the people to immediately trust and obey God and to take the land, because God had made them able. "Let us go up at once and take possession." It took great courage for this man to stand against the tide of unbelief, of doubt, and despite all that attitude. Caleb had the spirit of Romans 3:4, "Let God be true, but every man a liar." But the men who had gone up with him said their unbelieving response was a potent combination of truth, lies, and exaggeration. It was true from a human perspective that they are stronger than we, but to say we are not able to go up against the people was a lie. It was true that they had gone through the land, but to say a land that devours its inhabitants was a lie. Each of the statements, "All the men who we saw in it are men of great stature," or "the giants, and we were like grasshoppers," were all terrible exaggerations, plain and simple lies. The land through which we have gone as spies. Unbelief often presents itself as being factual, or practical, or down to earth. Yet the most factual, practical, and down to earth thing we can do is to trust the word of the living God. Their unbelief was not according to the facts, but despite the facts. Significantly, two men could see the exact same sights. The same grapes, the same men, the same land, the same cities. One can come away singing in faith, and the other is filled with a sense of certain doom. Ultimately, faith or unbelief does not spring from circumstances or environment, but from our hearts, which God must change. Yeah, and if they actually believed God, who he said he was, and what he'd already done for them in getting them out of Egypt with a strong hand and an outstretched arm, then what are these inhabitants of Canaan in the face of God? If they truly believed in the omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent God who said, I'm going to get you this land, yeah, then what are these people? Yeah, and so too we should believe God despite things that might present themselves to the contrary concerning this physical world. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.